Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I am your host, Paul O'Neid, and I am actually making the decision today that I'm not doing any ad reads because I'm bored of them. Today,
Because you're the boss
I'm
and
the boss.
YOLO, right? You do what you want.
I make the rules.
That's
Today, I
funny.
am joined by Etienne Asselin. Etienne, I actually had the pleasure of being on Etienne's podcast a few weeks ago. I interviewed his business partner, Ryan, who's a friend of mine here in Ottawa. And I was very excited to speak with him because of the dual role he does with personal training, with education, with online coaching. And I'm always interested to hear great people doing great things for great people. So, Etienne, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. That's a really nice intro. I'm excited to see where we'll go with today. I feel like we just met, but there's an ease of talking to you or with you. So yeah, I'm excited to see what threads we'll pull on today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to structure the podcast just like the two of us are having a coffee and catching up and getting to know each other. Because
Cool.
I think, again, there's so many coaches in this industry that are doing great things, but maybe don't have massive followings or care to. But if I can extend a platform that allows me to showcase the great things that they do, plus it's a great way for me to learn, right? And then that's ultimately it's a selfish pursuit that ends up in a benevolent outcome.
No doubt, man. Very much very similar reason why I started the podcast like 3 or so years ago, and why it's been rekindled with Ryan.
Yeah.
It's a means of meeting great people, and then also very selfishly learning a ton through the medium. So I share that with you for sure.
For sure. So let's get into it. Like, how did you end up in the situation that you're in? We were talking a little bit earlier. You're in Switzerland now. How did your journey start? Where did it go? And how'd you get here?
Man, yeah. I mean, that in and of itself, I feel like would be an hour. But I guess like Cole's notes, I'll start with how I got into training specifically. I was in high school. I sucked academically. I was profoundly average in athletics, and so athletics wasn't bringing me anywhere other than enjoyment during, which is great. But academically, I was really struggling in high school. And so I did what most, maybe perhaps not most, but what a lot of white men choose to do out of high school. And it's like, I'm going to be a cop. So I ended up going to l'Est collégiale in Ottawa with the aim of doing police foundations. And I realized really quickly that just wasn't for me. However, during that program, because I'd started going to the gym on occasion, I was like 130 something pounds, soaking wet, bro. Like
Oof.
I was really small. And actually, funny story. The reason why I started training was because I wanted to be better at basketball. But like the real reason was that I got like stapled, leveled in the pick and roll situation, playing against younger females at my old high school, and this happened in front of my classmates. And I was just like, and like she was a great player, that it's fine, but like she leveled me. I was like, fuck, okay. This like if I want to be better at this sport, like I need to add some
Yeah.
size, right? So that's actually why I started going to the gym. But I digress. I got into personal training once again, kind of through police foundations, because I had a little bit of experience in the gym in comparison to my colleagues that had none. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I can torture my friends and do leg days till they vomit and chest 4 times a week. And I'm like, this is great. Like,
Oh yeah.
I wonder if I could make money doing this, And so left police foundations, applied at Good Life as a trainer. That was in 2009. And from there, my story's kind of gone all over the place. My journey's been very nonlinear, but worked up to a management position. I guess from year 1 to year 7, worked up to a management position, and that's how I met Ryan, because I managed the Queensview location.
Okay.
And that's how he and I's friendship and then also business relationship started. From I guess like a career arc, that would be like the training side.
Mm-hmm.
From an educational side, my education, which is a huge part of, I guess, like what has led to today being like, the birth of the exercise mechanic and stuff like that, has been spurred forward by frustration, to be very transparent. It was that I felt a duty to help people, and I felt profoundly incompetent to be able to do so. I felt undertrained, and yet I really wanted to help. And so I just, anytime that things didn't work, it really profoundly bothered me, and I would read, do courses, and I just didn't stop looking. And at a certain point, thanks to the Canfit Pro conference in Toronto, which I'm
Yep.
assuming you've probably gone to that.
I've actually
Most fitness.
I've never attended it, but I'm
Really?
very familiar with it. Yeah.
Okay, that surprises me because I find it's like most fitness professionals, at least at some point, seemingly go there. So you're a rebel. I already knew that about you, but reinforcing it. But so I went to this seminar at Canfit Pro, which was given by Greg Roskopf, and it was called "Is Tightness Secondary to Weakness?" And I was like, "That's an interesting take," because I had a client with chronically tight hamstrings, and he really wanted to help with them. So I'm like, maybe a different perspective will help. So I did his course. That led me to the RTS program because
Hmm.
MAT and RTS have really strong affiliation. Did their entry level course. That blew my mind. Did their mastery course in Oklahoma, which was nothing short of revolutionary. I was their instructor in Canada for, I think, 4 or 5 years. Um, um, and and then from there, we eventually got to a crossroad, and I chose to move on and launch the exercise mechanic as a means of not only perhaps building off of some of the foundational pieces that I learned through them. Um, how am I doing so far?
Great, man. There's a lot to pull out of here. And then now you're in Switzerland.
Now I'm in Switzerland, like we talked about.
Yeah.
My wife got a job here at the United Nations, and so YOLO,
Yeah.
right? And
100%.
so came along for the ride, and it's honestly great over here, man. Like you were talking about with the states, with the move that yourself and your wife are planning to do, or will be doing soon. Like the as much as we have seasons here, we don't have the -30s.
Yep.
Um, and like the crippling cold. The summers are incredible. You've got the mountains, so absolutely zero complaints.
And are you fully online with your business now?
So for the that's a complicated answer. I'm going to say yes, but no. So
Okay.
yes, with regards to all of my clients in North America, but then also here, I'm doing some work in person at a studio a few days a week,
Oh,
doing some in
great.
person training. So that way I can earn some Swiss francs. So that way I
Yeah.
have a little bit more buying power. Yeah,
Well,
mixed answer.
that's the reason I ask is because I think when people view coaching, they view it through either a lens of in person or online.
Right.
And it's important to understand that your business can be whatever the fuck you want it to be. There are no rules. So if
Yeah.
you enjoy doing in person work and you want that to be part of your business, by all means, do some in person work. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to sit here and tell you it's the most lucrative way you could earn money, but not everything has to be about money. It can be about enjoyment and impact as well. So the fact that you're doing both, I think is great.
No doubt, man. And if I can just build on
Yeah,
that, so
absolutely.
something that you and I really have in common is learning. And
Mhm.
as much as I have learned a lot from my clients remotely, for me, there's no better school than in-person training.
Yep.
Like the of all of like between all the courses that I've done, and then also the time, quote unquote, in the trenches, which I feel is like
Mhm.
an overused term, but the time that I spent with clients over the course of my career, like by far the place where I've learned the most has been with the in-person work with my clients. So I think for me, it's essential for to remain relevant,
Yep.
because I find you can lose touch with perhaps the reality of what it is, um, like the realities that clients go through online. Sometimes, at least for me, that's something I struggle with. So the in-person is essential.
Oh, I'm totally there with you. I train one client a week in person, and it's a favorite hour or 2 hours a week of mine because it also keeps my sword sharp with communication. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people who have never coached in person lack the ability to translate communication into an online medium. But the better you're able to communicate in person, the more refined your coach's eye becomes, the better you're going to be able to serve those online clients. And I'm glad you mentioned the education piece because that was one thing that struck me in your story was you said you were a terrible student, you struggled academically, but now you're an educator.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
I think I was just, So it's interesting. The moment where things started clicking with me was that my good friend Chris Fudge, I decided to go back to school because I wanted to get some of the credits I was missing that I didn't get in high school to be able to go do my degree in exercise science at Ottawa U.
Okay.
And the courses that I need to take, if I remember correctly, I had algebra and functions, calculus, physics, chemistry, biology. I think I had another physics class. So it was just
The
like
good ones. The good
the,
ones.
the science, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, fuck, like I barely scraped by with 50s in all of those courses, but specifically mathematics, I really struggled in high school. And I apologize if you're hearing knocking. There's someone doing some construction
No, no,
next
no
door. So
worries.
sorry about that. Um, and Chris, he shared something with me. He was like, man, math is just games. He's like, you're good at games, right? I was like, yeah. And he's like, calculus is like, you have a tool, which is like I might get the names wrong, but you have like a derivative tool. And then you have these equations and you solve them using these various tools. That's all it is. It's just games. And I was like, huh, interesting. And so when I learned to view things differently, that opened up my mind to making things relevant. Like I viewed mathematics as being a means of training my brain and training problem solving. In contrast to when I was in high school, I'm like, this is dumb. Like I'm never gonna use these things. But now there was a place and there was a usefulness. And that I think for me was very much the beginning of my mind working differently and seeing gaps and leveraging different schools of thought or topics, et cetera, as a means of directly informing a given subject or as a means of developing certain kind of intellectual competencies.
Yeah.
So when I viewed it like that, it immediately opened things up for me. I think that was a big moment.
So the two things I want to highlight there for the listeners are, number one, most of the people that I have on the podcast who do some form of education as part of their business struggled as students. And I think
Mm.
more so it's because of the way things are taught rather than the way people learn. So when you have someone who is incredibly insightful and is able to parallel think, and you present them with an alternate viewpoint, all of a sudden it unlocks this panacea of learning opportunity. And that to me is the hallmark of someone who will be a great educator, in the same sense that, the best athletes are sometimes the worst coaches. Like if everything comes easy to you, how are you going to teach someone who's struggling?
Yeah.
And so if you're able to, maybe just switch the framework or apply some sort of parallel thought, all of a sudden everything changes and it becomes a lot more seamless for you. So that's definitely something that I see very common amongst the high achievers that we have on the podcast. The other one being that parallel thinking is so far reaching, right? So when you are able to learn about other schools of thought, whether it be philosophy, psychology, and you bring that into the fact that coaching is such a client focused business, you see that the X's and O's of muscle physiology, biomechanics, it almost becomes secondary. And you can't really get there without that parallel thinking. Is that something that you see like in your coaching practice?
Yeah, 100%. I might describe it using different words, but I think we're saying the same thing. Um, and one of the ways that I've kind of said it in the past to students is that generally speaking, if you want to really go deep when it comes to helping someone, having various tools allows you to do that. Um, and also, I don't know. I feel like our industry is so young. Like, let's not
Yeah,
kid ourselves. There's so much to learn, and
absolutely.
and if you look, you can make really interesting connections. Like, there's what would be an example? Like if you look at fear conditioning, there's a researcher called Joseph Ledoux who wrote I don't know if you've looked into his work at
I'm
all.
familiar with the name, but no.
Okay, so he wrote a kind of an interesting story if we get to it later, perhaps. But he has a book called The Emotional Brain that I read fully, perhaps like 6 or so years ago, and I was like, "Fuck!" There's like huge parallels between like the pathways and how we explain fear conditioning and the process of pain.
Mhm.
Like honestly, almost identical. And from based off of my current understanding, anyways. And so I find that really interesting. And so, like fear conditioning is a part of our curriculum when we talk about pain science and rehabilitation and drawing parallels between exposure therapy and how we use exercise to drive, therapeutic adaptations in a client's body. Like, um, and yet, like if you take a class on rehab, you usually won't learn
Yeah.
about those things. But if you look outside, it's like, fuck, okay, well, there's some really interesting themes that a lot of various domains that perhaps previously we thought were in silos, but they share a lot of themes.
Hmm.
So yeah, I definitely find that generally speaking, casting a wide net with regards to your interests um, is useful, as a trainer.
Whenever like whenever I'm talking about this sort of topic, what always comes to mind is, at the risk of sounding cliche, like there's many roads to Rome. So you will have schools of thought, or let's say intervention strategies that are purely based in one area and they get great results. And then you have other intervention strategies completely on the other side of the spectrum and they get great results. But I think they get great results for some people. The people that get results for most, if not all of the clients that they work with, they fall along that entire spectrum. So as you were saying, like they have a huge toolbox. And as you were going through it, you're like, oh, I learned from RTS, or I learned from this school of thought, or I read this book on fear and pain science, and I read this book on. It's like all you're doing is expanding your toolbox and giving yourself more opportunity to help the person in front of you. And this is the next step of what I want to go into. You mentioned in your story frustration as a motivator to serve, frustration as almost a call to action, that you needed to do something so that you could be better for your people. Can you dive in a little bit more into that? Because I know that, you go get a weekend certification and in your head, you're like, okay, I can help people. And then you're put in front of someone and you're like, I am fucking clueless.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I don't know. I'm curious actually, Paul, like, have you shared that feeling of frustration in your life? Like, has that been a driver for your learning as well?
No, I tend not to get very frustrated. I maybe a personality trait, but I don't. The only time I ever get frustrated, funny enough, is with myself. But it's more of a curiosity.
Mm.
The drive, like as you mentioned, like the drive to serve or the responsibility to the people that I work with, that's always there. It's running in the background, and it's more of a curiosity in terms of what more can I learn, what more can I do.
Hmm.
The whole aspect of frustration, it's more of an acceptance. I accept that I could be frustrated with the way other people market their services, or I could be frustrated with the way people speak negatively online, or I could be frustrated with the things that I see in the gym of being perpetuated as the thing. Rather, I adopt a more solution oriented approach in my own head, because being frustrated for me has always led to either bad decisions, poor mental headspace. And I won't lie to you, I've been frustrated in the past a lot. Like, I've been doing this since I was 18, so 19 years now. There have been a lot of seasons of change and growth for Paul.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the frustration piece though. I get it. Like I totally get it, but it seems like you're coming at it from a positive lens.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because what you said, you touched on how for you frustration is very much like directed at yourself,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and that feels very true to me as well.
Hmm.
And within the context of my ability to serve and help people, it's like, fuck, why can't I figure this out? Like, what am I doing wrong? I don't know. I feel like I don't take it lightly when someone chooses to invest, like if we're talking personal training at the beginning of my career, like 7Gs, nine
Yeah.
Gs, 10, right? And nowadays north of that per
Hmm.
year, like they're trusting you with a lot. And I really, really, really don't take that lightly. And so when I feel like there's results on the table, like what is it that I'm missing that what is it that I'm missing that is perhaps key or would help in moving this person forward? Like the fuel that then allows me to tap into is frustration. Frustration, and perhaps there's another word for it, but frustration, like that type of energy for me, like propels me forward. So and also there's also I also have like I think most trainers do, like, ADD, ADHD types of tendencies, and so in addition to that, I also hyper focus, like it's my job, on things that I get interested in, like
Okay.
um, going part of me, like being really fascinated by, we talked about like fear conditioning, like I went on like a deep dive of that over the course of like a year and a half, and then fascinating parallels with trauma, and um, pain neuroscience, biomechanics, et cetera, all of those things. And it's kind of like, I think if I look at my pattern, is I'll go deep into something thinking that that's where all my answers will be. And I'll find some, and then I'll notice there are gaps. Then it's like, fuck. And then, all right, cool. And then you go in, you go in this direction. And then you find that there's more to it. And that's why earlier when I kind of talked about my educational journey, I mentioned that it's been non-linear because it very much feels like this, I don't know, a bunch of switchbacks
Oh yeah.
going through and checking off a whole bunch of different uh, domains or silos of knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. I echo that sentiment. The analogy that I always use is like, have you ever been whitewater rafting?
No, no, no. I'm quite bad at swimming, and I've
Oh,
almost
okay.
drowned 4 times. So
So you stay away from the whitewaters.
I tend to stay away from just water.
So if anyone's ever been whitewater rafting, essentially you're like, oh, everything's smooth, we're all good, and then you get this holy shit moment where you're going through the rapids. I look at those holy shit moments going through the rapids as I run into a problem that I can't solve and I have to figure my way out of it. So that leads to some sort of new education endeavor. So you dive into something fully, like you said. And then you get out of that and you're like, okay, I've got some answers. Everything is calm. And then you run into another problem that you
Yeah,
don't have the answer to. You go
yeah,
through those white waters and then everything's smooth. The shitty part is that if you actually go whitewater rafting, at the end of it, you're fine. If you stay in this career, you never stop whitewater rafting. There's
100%,
always rapids that are going to come for you.
hundred
Um,
percent.
and I love, like, I get the same energy from those whitewater trips that I do from literally anything in my life. Like, whether I wish I could point to a hobby that I have, but I don't have any hobbies. It's just lifting weights and learning, lifting
Right.
weights, learning and coaching. But like I get the same from a max effort, heavy PR squat that I do from diving into solving a problem. And that hyper focus that you mentioned, I think is a very common trait amongst those of us who serve others because you're just so driven to do the best job that you can. And maybe this is a maybe this is another philosophical question in terms of the way you structure the education programs, but when you are like, because I know you guys do a lot of in-person stuff,
Yeah.
when you're in person with those groups, is that a common trait that you see? Like, do you see that like drive in people to serve, or are you seeing less and less of that?
Um, I wouldn't say I'm seeing less of it, and I wouldn't say that it's common.
Okay.
Um, Perhaps, and I wouldn't say that it's common in the sense that, like, perhaps it doesn't manifest externally in the same way that it might for you and I. Perhaps it's just kind of a more kind of discrete flavor that other people have. But I think those students that stand out, and there are some,
Mhm.
generally what we try to do immediately is bring them into our ecosystem. Like even like starting, how would I say, letting them know first and foremost that's like, hey, like I see something in you.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of potential, not only within your career, but also if ever you'd be interested in joining our team, I would be interested in seeing what that could look like, um, and looking, like, how would I say, grasping opportunities when you see kind of like that X factor in students.
Mhm.
Because also like because I know that within the context of what we're trying to do with the exercise mechanic, which in a nutshell, I always think of Austin Powers when I say that, but um, in a nutshell, it's about just improving the quality of service in the fitness industry, because the fitness industry is just a healthcare powerhouse, amongst other things like healthcare, empowerment for clients, et cetera. Just a powerhouse for a variety of reasons. And so we have a huge amount of potential impact. Like our platform is really great. The vehicle's fantastic. And because of that, there's a huge amount of potential power that we have as an industry. So long story short, I know that like for us, what we're looking to do is we're looking to form, kind of like curate, nurture minds, nurture leaders as a means of helping this industry move forward. I can't do it alone. Ryan and I can't do it by ourselves. We have one of our other colleagues, Brett. Like we can't do it. The three of us.
Yeah.
So we need just really, really great people have who are perhaps aligned with when it comes to the intangibles. So to come back to it, I think that your question was like, is that something that I'm noticing less of when it
Mm.
comes to the in-person courses? I don't think so. I do wonder if it shows up differently person to person. Um, and the people that do have it, they really stand out. They are rare,
Yeah.
but they shine in the courses. There's like a sparkle in their eye, and it's important to us to like grab them when they come through.
I'm glad that you said that. And then, truthfully, the reason why I asked the question is because I am seeing less of it on the
Interesting.
surface. On the
Mm,
surface, I see less of it. And I think it's more a function of what we're exposed to in our like your online diet, where you may get like none of us get into this industry. I shouldn't say that actually, because I think that has changed as well. But I was going to say none of us get into this industry for nefarious reasons, right? Like we don't get into this industry to hurt people. I think the majority of us get into this industry to help people initially. And I think some of
mhm,
us get into this, some people, not us, get into this industry to make money. They see it as an incredible revenue generating machine, which it can be. But I love that you said those people who are driven to serve, it is like very obvious and they stand out. Because if you take a deep look into your online diet, it's very easy to see the people who are driven to serve and those people who are driven through other less helpful means. Um, and I think a lot of those people who are driven to serve can get influenced into changing their motivations. And
mm.
I love what you said about the responsibility of the coach, the responsibility of the trainer, the responsibility of our fitness industry as a whole. It's something I think about very often, the impact that we can have on the people that we work with. How do you go about making sure that you stay aligned with those values to serve and you don't get sidetracked by the other shit?
I don't have a choice. There's no like there's no decision of like, oh, I need to make sure there's this like I would probably throw myself off of a bridge if like I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I was to kind of like act out of alignment with that. I think that like fundamentally one of the I don't know if it's like my core beliefs or core values, but just like be a good human, take care of people, um, is so central to who I am that and I hope this doesn't sound like tooting my own horn, but it truly feels impossible for me to act in opposition
Yep.
to that.
I feel the same way, man. And it doesn't sound like you're
Yeah.
tooting your own horn. Like a lot of the reasons why I ask the questions that I do is because I almost expect the response that I'm going to get. And I think it's important for especially young coaches to hear that from people who are successful in their businesses, to know that you do not have to sacrifice your values for the dollar.
Mhm.
Even the way that like I'm fully transparent on the podcast, and whenever we talk about business or finances, like I don't give numbers, but like I make more money than I would ever have thought possible to make when I was making $53,000 a year as a head strength and conditioning coach at the biggest university in Canada.
Mhm.
At that point, I was like, I have my dream job and I'm making $53,000 a year working 100 hours a week. This is fucking awesome. Now, I still think this is fucking awesome every single day, but I make a lot more money. The money is never the motivator. The motivator is this is fucking awesome.
Right.
I think a lot of people, when they look at the online fitness industry specifically, they look at it as, well, if I'm not making $100,000 a month like so and so says I should be, I'm a failure. Rather than, I just made a difference for 10 amazing people this month. And next month, I'm going to make a difference for 11 amazing people. And then just slowly growing that amazing impact over time. When you look at like the growth of the online business that you've created, what have you been able to leverage with regards to those values to keep that business growing?
What have I been able to leverage with my values? I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, earlier we were talking about this frustration, we were talking about this curiosity. Um, and I still think that this like need to serve well, this feeling like I have a duty to do good by my clients. Um, that for me is a really big driving force. And if I try to think of like what has it been about perhaps my success with regards to transitioning more so online, I think it's been that because
Yeah.
it's very much a different skill set. Like there are aspects of it that are transferable, but you go from working 14 years in person to then over the course of maybe 6 months doing a total quote unquote 180 with
Mhm.
regards to how the medium that you use to help people. I very much felt like a fish out of water.
Mm.
And so there was an element of like, okay, well, I need to figure this out. And uh, because I have people that are depending on me.
Mm.
And I also remember distinctly on a few occasions being like, this is difficult because I find that, and I'm sure you are the same way. When you're with someone in person, it's almost like you have a sixth sense. You know exactly what to do.
Yep.
Like you're not even thinking, there's just knowing, and you just do the thing, it's good for them. And generally speaking, like
Yep.
um, online, especially initially, there was none of that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, well, this is going to force me to develop different skills. This is going to force me to develop really like ironclad systems that I can use to help a lot of people. Excuse me. Because if I don't develop those systems, I'm not going to be able to work with sufficient amount of folks to be able to put food on the table, if we're talking specifically with my coaching practice.
Yeah.
Um,
There has
so
to
those
be
are
an
my two
element.
initial thoughts.
Sorry,
All good.
the reason I ask, like, there has to be an element that you can scale, and I think people, when they think scale, they think fast, they think speed. Scale to me is more of a long term metric,
Mm-hmm.
and when you drive scale based on impact, that scale is sustainable. And so when we're looking at setting up a business in the long term, we have to look at how long can I sustain this level of growth. So I've been following since we did our podcast together, I've been following you, and not once have I seen any sort of like direct marketing hard sell.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from the post that you put up that, hey, we're hosting a seminar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yet I'm sure that your business is successful. So what I'm gathering from your answer is that I've just continued to serve, and that continued drive to serve has, if I was to guess, knowing nothing else about your business, that you run a fully referral based business.
Yep, for sure. And in it, yeah, 100%. And then also in addition to that, with regards to the growth of the educational branch, it's about leveraging relationships and people who over the years, um, we've either myself or Ryan or other folks of the team have worked directly or indirectly with people that we know who are picking up what we're putting down and agree with the vision and
Mhm.
asking for assistance.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, those are definitely the two big mediums. That being said, it's interesting. I find I definitely have a lot to learn with regards to how to like operate a business and going to meet folks, especially if we think of what we're trying to accomplish specifically with the exercise mechanic. It's like meeting and working with a higher volume of fitness professionals. Like we need to find ways to get our content in front of their eyes
Mhm.
as a means so that they have the choice to be like, do we vibe with these people or not? But we need to get eyes on what we're doing. And so we're still very much try, learning how to do that at this point. So yeah, but right now definitely very heavy on the referrals side of things.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly the best way to build a business long term. I
I
did
would
a
agree.
podcast with a friend of mine. His name's Simon Chang. It was like pretty early on in the podcast. I think maybe a year and a half ago. And Simon has a full roster of clients, and he made 3 posts in 2022 on
Nice.
social media. And I was like, and I was a bit in shock because I knew that he was a great coach. I knew that he was doing great things for his people, but I had no idea the scale to which he leverages this referral
Hmm.
based scaling strategy. And it was a bit eye opening for me because it made me reflect on how I've truly built my business. And I mean, you've been following me. You see, I post every day. I try to provide value. There's nothing that's like inherently nefarious or salesy, or I never try to do those things. And I was like, oh, well, I do that too. I just put out more content. And again, the reason I put out more content is because I'm trying to get eyes on the other things that I do: mentorship, education, that sort of thing. Um, Actually, this is a great question. When you look at the industry, I have a feeling that you have a very growth mindset when it comes to the things that you do and the people that you serve, meaning that you brought me on your podcast knowing full well that I run an education company, that it could have been a complete conflict of interest to say, like, hey, Paul has Coach's Corner University. We have the exercise mechanic. But instead, I'm sure you look at it as, well, we both do great things. And if some of our people want to take Paul's courses and some of his people want to take our courses, we all grow because the industry grows with great people. How do you look at that sort of aspect when it comes to even teaching others? It's like, well, if I'm mentoring someone else to run a coaching business that directly conflicts with my coaching business, you could see that as like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to help that person.
Hmm.
But that can't be how we grow. And I think that comes back to what you said about responsibility.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a few thoughts. The
Yeah,
first is, I mean, I'm not disillusioned to think that I know everything, nor am I disillusioned in thinking that even if I did, that I'd be able to get through to everybody.
I
And
like that.
I think that even if you and I knew exactly the same material, you and I are very different people with different history. We communicate differently. And so therefore we can reach different people at different stages of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So um yeah, like, so if I think of like, I think that the exercise mechanic was, as an educational initiative, was not, its origin story is not self-serving. It's something that is meant to drive something outside of me and outside of you and outside of Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for that reason, it's like, yeah, fucking awesome, great. Like, let's link arms and let's
Yes.
let's move this thing forward. Um, and then the second piece, and this, I lost my train of thought slightly, so hopefully I'll be able to find it again. Um, has to do, the second word that came to mind when you were talking is love. And I think that, when you were talking about students coming in who are mentees, you might be helping them grow a business that is, like, in many ways, perhaps like heavily influenced or like a copy of your coaching business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know. And so why would we do that? Why would we potentially decrease the total client pool that we have to pull from? And I think that I think for me, the word that comes to mind is love. Like it's caring, genuinely caring for the other person, and ensuring and checking yourself to make sure that's like, well, am I making a decision from that place of doing the right thing for this person, and then also by extension all the people that they will meet and touch, or am I doing this just from a self-serving place? And then once you have that answer, ask yourself which answers do you like? Like,
Mm,
on your tombstone, do you want like self-serving prick, or do you want like, or written, or do you want like helped a lot of people? And
yeah.
and there's that for me is something that I use a lot to kind of check myself. Like even quite without exaggeration, today I realized that I made a poor financial decision associated to the clinic that I work with here, and I didn't
Hmm.
know it at the time. I realized it 2 days ago. This morning, I journaled about it. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm in the wrong. I owe them money. So like, I reached out, and the reason why I reached out to be like, hey, like, here's my mistake. I'm really sorry. Here's what happened. Here's how I'm willing to pay you back. Here's how it's not going to happen again. Um, and like the reason why I did that is just because it's the right thing to do. And
Yep.
the way that I know if it's the right thing to do is just like, would I want that written on my tombstone or not?
Yeah.
So I think like the service piece is really important, and
Yep.
we've talked about that in a variety of different ways,
Oh yeah.
but it seems like it really just kind of keeps coming back to that.
Always. And you said something in the way that you were describing the concept of love that you talk about, like love for that person in front of you and doing
Mm-hmm.
what's right by them. You said I could look at it as me reducing my ability to reach a set pool of people, or like reducing the amount of people I'm able to reach because they're taking some of it. I think the true like love in that is the love for the people that we serve, knowing that if I help this person create a business, even if it is the carbon copy of exactly what I do, they are going to bring other people into that pool. They're going to grow the industry. And the direction I want to take the next conversation is the responsibility of our industry. I know that's something that you feel very strongly about. You mentioned it earlier as you know a a healthcare a healthcare vehicle or a healthcare
Powerhouse.
powerhouse. Yeah, the industry is a healthcare powerhouse. Talk to me a
Mhm.
little bit about that.
Yeah, sure, man. I like this topic a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do think that the fitness industry is a healthcare powerhouse. If you think of, if we were to perhaps um, make a comparison between clinicians and trainers, just to kind of illustrate the idea. Clinicians, will see their clients or their patients individually, like during the course of a month. I don't know, like once a week. If it's really acute, twice a week max. And that frequency isn't something that lasts for extended periods of time. Generally speaking, of course, it depends on the clinician. But if we think about if we were to draw a contrast when it comes to frequency of care between clinicians, whether they be physios, chiros, osteos, you name it, all of the O's, you compare the frequency at which they see their people in comparison to the frequency at which we see them, we trump them in terms of, right?
Hard Trump. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's like some people would say that Trump is a bad word right now, depending on where you stand. But we won't go there. But
That's a
but
whole other podcast.
whole other podcast. Yeah. So when it comes to frequency, like we win. We have the advantage as a platform. We also, I believe, have the advantage when it comes to relational depth. So you think of like
Absolutely.
what is it, white coat syndrome or the white coat effect, in terms of like when people meet clinicians, generally speaking, people put up their guards, et cetera. That's a thing. But then also because of the frequency at which we see people, you foster really like deep, genuine, not
Mhm.
just transactional, but just genuine friendships with folks. So we're winning with regards to frequency, and we're also winning with regards to depth, potential depth of influence.
Agree.
And so then the next piece is just like, how skillful are we?
Mm.
And that's a huge opportunity, I think, in the fitness industry, which is once again this is where the exercise mechanic comes from. It's like we've got the platform, we've got the vehicle. If we can just be more effective, if we can be more intentional, if we can think more like critically about what we're doing, more accurately about what we're doing, and thus be more powerful, leverage that vehicle, the change that we can catalyze in an individual person, and then also the ripple effects of that in their families, their communities, et cetera, is immeasurable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I'm really excited about. And it's why I serve the fitness industry.
Yeah. I listen, we align 100% on that topic because, and this is actually something that I was exposed to very early. So in the collegiate strength and conditioning world, so I moved down to Tampa, Florida in 2010. And I realized I was like, these guys and girls are in the weight room about 3 times as much as they are on the practice field with their coach. Because there's actually an NCAA rule on how much practice time they can actually have and how much time they can devote to sport. So one of the first lessons that I learned from one of my first mentors, Frank Wintrick, was we are with these kids more than they are with their coach. Think about the impact you can have. And he literally just said that to me and walked away.
Yeah.
And I've kept that with me every step, because the next piece that you mentioned was relationships. And this is one thing where I actually think online leverages relationships, or can leverage relationships even more than in person, because of the frequency of touch points. So even in our onboarding for new clients, we have a form that they fill out called the coach athlete relationship form. And it asks them questions about the best ways that we can support them. To me, that is the hallmark of great coaching, is how do we form a relationship? Because you know as well as I do, personal training and in-person personal training, some of your sessions are just going to be therapy sessions.
Yeah, no doubt.
You're just going to listen to the client vent.
Yeah.
But your ability to leverage a true relationship, gain that trust, create a safe space for vulnerability, whether it's getting under a heavy bar and facing fear, whether it's being hungry and facing all the emotions and stress around a diet, your ability to leverage that relationship towards a positive outcome for that individual is going to be hinged on your skill and the frequency. So, like, everything you said, I resonate so deeply on. And maybe to provide some actionables for the audience, like, what are some of the ways that you go about establishing the relationship initially and then maybe building upon it within your coaching practice?
Um, so I'll give perhaps I'll start with some concrete things. But before I do, I want to just circle back to just double click on what was the name of that mentor who told you, who highlighted the power that you have as a coach?
His name's Frank Wintrick, and he's actually, since working in 2010 at South Florida, he's had like 4 or 5 huge college strength jobs, and then now he works with the FBI in their strength conditions. He's a fucking stud.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
I mean, when you mentioned that, I was like, how lucky have we been, to have those moments?
Oh yeah.
Like one of those moments for me, and then I'll circle back to your question because I think it was really great, but I just want to really highlight this. I also got really lucky at the beginning of my career. I think I was a few weeks in, and one of my mentors told me that it's like, if you're not comfortable with nuance, you're in the wrong profession. Like if you're not comfortable, leave
Yep.
right now. Don't even fucking get started. Like if
Yep.
you're looking for black and whites, you're not going to find it here, you know. And I really owe, honestly, I think my career to him, Peter Chiasson, who unfortunately is deceased.
Oh.
Um, but like I owe my professional progression to him,
Mm.
like for sure, in more ways than one. Um, so I wanted to just highlight that
Yeah,
because
for
I think
sure.
and this is why in the exercise connect, this is why we choose to like go looking for and invest in our students, because I'm only where I am now because people chose to do that to me and
Mm-hmm.
believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. They saw something, right? So I think those moments are really really crucial.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, with regards to fostering the connection and the communication piece, first thing I do is consults. I book like 2.5 hours for consultations.
Oh, wow.
Um, I never rush a consultation ever because I've had consultations with folks that last 30 minutes and sometimes they last 90, sometimes 2 hours. Sometimes the client is sobbing and it's just the like the wrong thing to just be like, oh, well, sorry, gotta go. At least for me, it's always felt a little bit
Yep.
icky. And I've always wanted to be like, when that has happened, I've been like, fuck, like I wish I had more time to like really take care of you.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's the first thing that comes to mind. And then the second piece that I think I try to do is I try to view myself in the other person, like in the sense of like really trying to empathize with them,
Hmm.
trying to relate with their struggles. I think sometimes it's easy to be like, for because of the distance, to view other people's struggles as simple. But in reality, if we were to turn the mirror on ourselves, I think we would realize that we struggle with fucking trivial things also, and other people
Yeah.
would have the same assessment of us. And so I think that leveling that playing field um, is really important. One of my mentors early on in my career, not Peter, but another one, said like, don't do yourself the disservice of putting me on a pedestal.
Hmm.
Um, and and so what that, at least for me, like leveling as much as I can the not the playing field, so to speak, but bringing myself down or allowing myself and my client to relate essentially from the same level, in contrast to top down, for me is really important.
Hmm.
Um, letting them know also that it's like, how would I say, like I'm making this up as much as you are, like I don't know what we're going to be doing a week from now. I don't.
Right.
And I could lie to you, but I won't, because it's the nature of the work. We don't know what's going to happen a week from now. That being said, I have a whole bunch of experience. We have a really great understanding of these things, and we're going to work through this together. And I find that like that type of language for me helps create like a really strong therapeutic alliance. I tend to work a lot with treatment resistant cases, which is why I use
Okay.
that kind of language. So it creates a really strong therapeutic alliance where the patient or the client isn't coming to me to get fixed, but they're working with me.
Hmm.
And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and that highlights something that I'm very big on is like separating the relationship with the client from the transaction, because ultimately they're paying you to be their friend, right? If you want to put like they're paying you for a service, but they're also paying you for that relationship. And I think when you bring yourself down to that level and align yourself with them, that transaction almost becomes an afterthought, and then you can actually focus on the person. The other thing I really love that you highlighted is that your goal is to collaborate with the client, right?
Mhm.
Because ultimately, your outputs are dependent on their inputs. And unless you have that collaborative approach, you can't really do your job. Um, an action item here is, how have you found ways to leverage that within the online space? Because in person, it's easy. You're right there. How has your transition into the online space challenged you to try and do that same thing?
Um, I mean, it's definitely challenged me for sure. I think that the two mediums that I've concretely, the two things I've done have been, number one, just like getting my clients on WhatsApp and being willing to show up for them depending on what's coming up in their message. Like, you know, uh, not only being able to read overtly and directly what they're saying, but also being able to read between the lines and to be able to hear the desperation that maybe they're trying to kind of subtly indicate. I think having that kind of on your radar is important. Um, Another thing in addition that I've done is sometimes like if they need support, I'll spend more time with them. I had uh, when was this? This woman and I worked together for about a year and a half, and she's on the spectrum, so she has Asperger's, and uh, like she needed a ton of help.
Mhm.
When it came to like how much she was paying me or how many hours she was paying me for, there were some months where I significantly went over. Like I think she was paying me for two, like in addition to the programming, the consulting, and all of that stuff, she was paying me for 2 1-hour calls because
Mhm.
she wanted to have those touch points, or maybe it was even 4 a month. And there were some weeks where we would spend 8 hours on the phone. And now
Holy.
that's not something that I recommend. But in my mind, necessarily as a blanket statement that you should do that with everyone. But in my mind, it's like this is what this woman needs. She needs help. I have the ability to help her, and so I'm going to do it. At least initially, I'm going to take this step. And I'm going to see if I can help, and if I can't, I'm going to refer her to somebody else. But in her specific situation, I chose to break my rule, so to speak, my hard lines in terms of like, this is the time that you have, this is the time that you don't, because I felt like she needed it.
Mhm.
Um, and fortunately, in her case, because she was a multiple trauma survivor, and so there was a whole bunch of stuff coming up in our work. And so, fortunately, through our work, she improved dramatically, and then she was able to tolerate greater distance. And
Mm.
had that not happened, within a relatively short period of time, if I didn't feel like I was making headway, then I would have absolutely referred out. But within the first few times that I broke my rule and kind of like met her halfway, it yielded positive results for her. And so chose to kind of pull on that thread a little bit, and it ended
Mhm.
up being really fruitful. So to answer your question, I think that and I think because I listened to a few segments of your conversation with Ryan,
Mhm.
and if I remember correctly, the title of the podcast with him is Human First or something along those lines.
Mhm.
And that is absolutely something that I practice, and I know that that's something that you practice as well.
Yep.
And so just not losing touch of that, like leading with that, like what does this person need, not this client, like what does this person need, and how can I help? And being willing to break your rules now and then, depending on if someone really needs it.
I'm glad that you said that because this is something that I try really hard to communicate about this in the online space, but I find it challenging because you're limited in time. But when you're operating from a client first or human first perspective and leveraging service above all else, you do get to a bottleneck. So you get to this
Mm-hmm.
bottleneck of time.
Yeah.
And so if you're investing all of this time into the people that you serve, it ultimately limits how many people that you serve. So like I personally have a cap on how many clients I will allow myself to onboard. So I keep myself at 40 clients because for me at 40 clients, I can provide a very high level of service and I have some flexibility to break my rules if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I go over that, now I run into problems with delivery. And for me, I'm not willing to compromise service. How do you look at the balance between service and scale? Because ultimately, we do need to continue to scale revenue or scale impact. Has that changed, maybe the service offerings that you have, or maybe has that changed the way that you orchestrate your coaching practice? I'm always curious how people balance the two.
Yeah, I think it's hard, man. And I don't know if I don't know if I have perhaps a really satisfying answer. I think it's the kind
It's
of
totally
thing that
fair.
yeah, I think it's something that I've stumbled through and uh, iterated based off of like some of the challenges that have presented themselves. Um, how do I go about that? Because I agree, because there's, for instance, for myself, when it comes to the online coaching that I offer right now, like I limit myself at around 20-25.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, anything beyond that, I'm like my mind is like too spread thin, and it becomes really difficult for me.
Yep.
Um, yeah, man, I don't know. That's a really hard question.
It's
I think
okay
it's
if you
just,
don't have an answer. I think it's
yeah,
okay.
I think it's just the kind of thing you just need to always circle back to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are my needs? What are my boundaries? And doing the best you can to reconcile that with doing the best you can for the person that's in front of you. And inevitably, like you said, I mean, the word used was crossroads. I love that because you will reach crossroads often, like
Hmm.
using the rapid analogy, like, fuck, here's more rapids. Right. and,
Yep.
and it's like, okay, great. And so as we're going through this, like what's going to present itself as being something that I need to change or modify. Um, but it's a constant thing that I keep coming back to, you know?
Hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think we always need to be checking ourselves and doing audits along the way. Like, am I doing things that are aligned with my values? Am I serving people to the degree that I believe they need to be served? And then what you said is like, is this serving me?
Yeah,
I had
need
one of
both.
my I do weekly check-ins with my mentorship clients, in the same way that I do weekly check-ins with my coaching clients. And one of my mentees came back with the fact that she realizes that she's been a service to her business, a servant to her business, as opposed to allowing her business to serve her. And I think on a deep level, our business does need to serve us. And if we feel like we're always behind the eight ball, if we feel like we're always struggling to keep up with service delivery, if we feel like we're always trying to, you know, do what's best for other people at our own detriment, now that's a cue to be like, hey, we need to pull it back. Maybe we're doing too much. And how can you go about doing that? Well, you can scale your price. You can graduate some of your clients into maybe a lower touch service offering when they meet that requirement.
Hmm.
There's a whole bunch of business related changes that you can make. But I'm glad that you highlighted that you don't have all the answers, because I don't think any of us have all of the answers, and we're just going through rapids until we reach that calmness. Then there's going to be new rapids that take place. There's an analogy that I actually don't think it's very accurate, but I think it's appropriate in that at each stage of growth in your company, something breaks. So, when you get from 0 to 100,000, for example, usually it's in increments of income. From 0 to 100,000, you can get by without many systems, but at $100,000, you're going to need some systems. Once you grow from that 100 to 200, those systems are going to break and you'll need new systems. From 200 to 500, something's going to break. It's and at each level, something different breaks. And I've actually seen it in our own business, like building from like 0 to 100, relatively seamless. I just offered great service and continue to get referrals. From 100 to 200, oh, now we need a CRM. 200 plus, okay, now I have additional coaches. I have a team. So from 2 to 500, something broke. We needed a better website, better systems, more automations. We needed a coaching app. And so, the past couple of years has been a lot of transitions. And so the
Hmm.
fact that you're highlighting, like, okay, I do things this way now. I bet you if we touch base in 2 years, you'll probably have a much different looking business.
Yeah, I hope so. And same thing with you, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the point. That's the point. Like, there's an expression or a quote that I heard, and I believe it was from John Wyland, and he's like a relationship coach, and he talked about how like the things that you care about in life, like all of the things you care about, they take blood, meaning like they take like there's work, there's suffering that you have to put into it. It's your relationship to the blood taking that matters. It's a little bit of an odd analogy, but
No, I love
the
it.
what feels true to me is it's like, man, like, like the challenges never end. If you assume that when challenges present themselves, that equals bad or problematic, that's really going to hinder your ability to dance with them and learn from them and grow from them and adapt and get better. Whereas if you acknowledge that it's just kind of a part of the game, it's a part of the landscape, is what it is, and then when those things inevitably present themselves, it's like perfect. I knew this was going to happen. Didn't know exactly what, but I knew this type of moment was going to present itself, and so here we are. And so let's dance with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in contrast to like resisting what is.
I love it. Um, Listen, let's jump into some quick hit questions because
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like we could continue to chat for a really long time.
We have too much in
Um,
common.
yeah, I know. What is your favorite thing about living in Switzerland?
The mountains, man. The mountains, the nature, the beauty. Um, there's that's absolutely the best part. You look around and you're surrounded by beauty. So
Yeah.
by far, that's my favorite.
Perfect. What is something you mentioned lessons learned from mentors? What's a lesson that you learned from a client that's really stuck with you?
There's one that stands out uh, because I was about to fire this client, and uh, I had a moment where I leading up to this conversation with her, I was like, okay, because she had said some like insulting things that like my
Hmm.
colleagues nearby were like, oh fuck, you
Oh,
know,
geez. Okay.
yeah, yeah, and I was just like, this is just not okay, you know, like emotional abuse, like went up from a client, like I'm not down. But then I asked myself, I was like, right, why am I here?
Hmm.
I'm here to help people. This woman absolutely needs help. So can I take one more step to try to figure out what went wrong here? So her and I had a conversation. And then that's when she shared with me that she also, this is a different client than earlier, but she also is on the spectrum. She has a few various conditions that makes that she has a lot of trouble reading and also transmitting body language. And so things like humor and empathizing with people is difficult for her. And and so she's like, and that sometimes happens. It's like, and the result of that is that sometimes I say really insulting things, but I mean it as a joke. And I was like, oh, you mean like when you said this? And she was like, yeah, I thought that was funny, you know? And I'm like, no, that's right.
That's
Off
so bad.
offside. And so it was it was a moment. I still work with this woman,
Yeah.
and she's an amazing friend of mine as well. And she's crushing it in spite of all the challenges that she's faced and continues to face. So to answer your question, the thing like the lesson that I learned relatively recently was thanks to her, and the lesson is just that it's like reminder that it's not about me. Like the reason why I do
Mm.
this work, the reason why I do this work and not working at Subway or you know fixing cars or what have you. The reason why I've chosen in the past and why I continue to choose this medium is because it's not about me and it's about them.
I think that might be the title of the podcast, man.
Cool.
That's good. If you had a billboard on the side of the road with a message on it for everyone to read, what would it be?
Take the exercise mechanic. I'm just playing. No. um, I don't know, man. I think this is really hard. It changes depending on season, you know?
Yep.
Um, I know that Ryan said give a shit when he was on here, and I vibe with
Oh
that. So I'm
yeah.
gonna say give a shit for sure. Because caring is essential.
I love it. And if there was one person that you would like to see me interview on the podcast, who would it be? But the
Oh man.
caveat is you got to help me get them on.
Fuck. Okay. So um Greg Lehman, for sure. He's a fantastic physiotherapist and chiropractor and based out of Canada. He's awesome. Has really great courses as well. Reconciling biomechanics is a course of his that's fantastic. Um, really, really recommend that you connect with him. And I can help. I can absolutely uh, help with that connection for sure
Perfect.
because I know Greg and I consider him a friend. Who I would love to see you have on who I don't know if I can actually facilitate the connection would be Joseph Ledoux, who I mentioned earlier,
Mm.
who is the fear conditioning researcher. He's a really interesting speaker and really bright man.
I'll just reach out to him and be like, hey, man, do you know who I am?
Yeah, maybe that might work. That might work. You've got some pretty good headshots, man. So that could work. I
Oh,
could see
well,
that
there you
working.
go.
Yeah.
Uh, Etienne, thank you so much for joining me, man. I really, really appreciate it. I'll have links to where everyone can find you and the exercise mechanic in the show notes. But again, I just really want to thank you for sharing some time.
Thanks, man. I had a lot of fun.
Appreciate it. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.